if you've been obsessively following coronavirus news like me, then you might have caught mention of a new way to catch the virus, of the packaging of frozen foods. But is this frozen dumpling really a threat? Or is this all just some kind of weird political game? It all started on June 11, 2020, when health officials reported a new case of coronavirus in Beijing after 57 days of being COVID-free. Within a matter of weeks, this single case grew into an outbreak of more than 180 new infections. In just 2 weeks, 3 million people were tested for coronavirus. The Chinese authorities was ready to deal with this new wave of infection. The Beijing Center for Disease Control and Prevention traced the outbreak back to this wholesale food market, and soon, reports like this claimed that health officials found the source.
Let's take a look at how it started. One place got experts' attention: the Xinfadi Wholesale Food Market in southwest Beijing, where lots of seafood is sold. Experts from CDC immediately went to that market and found several goods, including salmon, tested positive. Virtually every confirmed patient can be traced back to that market.
In the weeks that followed, this story that the COVID-19 virus could live on the packaging of frozen foods quickly took hold on Chinese media as new outbreaks continued to crop up across China.
Now, in the southern Chinese city of Shenzhen, authorities say COVID-19 has been detected on the surface of a frozen chicken wings imported from Brazil.
On the Chinese mainland, some frozen food packaging were found to be positive for the coronavirus.
This is the first time that live COVID-19 virus has been found on the outer packaging of cold chain food.
The logic of these claims goes something like this. The vast majority of COVID-19 transmissions are believed to take place through the air, as the virus is spread via droplets from one infected person to the next. But scientists know the coronavirus can also survive on surfaces. It's why they tell us to wash our hands, and why most cities are now cleaner than they've ever been. We also know that the virus lives longer in colder conditions, which is why Chinese health officials now say food packaging that's shipped frozen can carry COVID-19 to new unsuspecting populations. But is there actually evidence to support this claim? Chinese health officials say yes.
So for the imported food, especially in the cold chain, from those countries may have the possibility to carry the virus, and the virus could survive even better in the cold temperature environment. That's why the cold chain imports could be a higher possible carrier of the virus.
The World Health Organization, on the other hand, isn't so convinced.
What we understand is that China is testing on packaging. They've tested a few 100,000 samples and have found very, very few, less than 10, positive in doing that.
We will continue to track findings like this, but as Maria said, there is no evidence that food or the food chain is participating in transmission of this virus.
So who should we believe? I caught up Dale Fisher, a professor in infectious diseases at the National University of Singapore, to ask whether or not we're really at risk from what's in our freezers.
We know it's very heat labile, so if you've got it up to very warm temperatures, then it really won't last more than a couple of days. But at frozen and refrigerated temperatures, there's no doubt it can last weeks.
Can coronavirus be transmitted via imported food packages?
I believe the hypothesis that China puts out is quite viable. I don't think we should confuse it as a major cause of transmission, but I'd like to emphasize that it could seed a new outbreak. So one of the remarkable things about this pandemic, which no one saw coming, was that food processing plants, abattoirs, if you like, origins of the food pipeline, have been frequent sources of outbreaks or sites of outbreaks. It's believed that if the site has got a lot of COVID, then people could actually contaminate the food or the meat, and then it's frozen and packed, and as we say, it's sort of hitching a ride. Then you export the food, you open the box, and there's the COVID still alive, and if someone touches it with their hands, then touches their face, for instance, then they can be that first new index case.
What about in terms of the food package itself? Is there an explanation to why food packages are tested positive?
Why is it always marketplaces? If it was people bringing it into China, these are not market workers. So that's the theory, and that's why China started testing some of their imported products and found that the packaging actually was positive for PCR, and on some occasions they've actually even managed to culture it. Now that's still circumstantial evidence because, of course, a worker in the marketplace could have coughed on the food, for instance, and then it was swabbed. But nonetheless, it's still a very curious set of circumstances that we know the origins are potential hotbeds of infection. We strongly believe it can survive the trip, and then can it infect people in a marketplace, and then that person becomes a new index to infect others. This is the hypothesis. Very difficult to prove.
While it's possible for frozen packaging to transmit COVID-19, Chinese media has backed this as a likely origin of the virus. China political expert Andrew Small tells us why.
I think there's a few different aims that the Chinese government has had with this. First of all, is obviously just to avoid blame for the enormous harm that the pandemic has wrought on the world. I think secondly, though, also to avoid the kind of level of scrutiny that it would imply if the pandemic was understood to have originated in China. And I think also they want to tell the story at home that the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party performed successfully. There was huge internal criticism of the cover-up in particular in the early days. And I think kind of a perception that it reflected the style of governing and the way the system was operating under Xi Jinping, that this sort of propagandizing, the desire to bury bad information, including, of course, by literally arresting the whistleblowers, was one of the main reasons that the pandemic wasn't more quickly contained. Blaming foreigners instead, I think, kind of helps to get them off the hook. Some of the development of the viruses is often taking place in certain parts of South China, and that because of, on wet markets in particular, and because you have various contexts in which you have kind of human-animal interactions of a particular sort, that the species jump, which has often been so critical, is something that has taken place in China before, and is expected to be an environment in which this is likely to take place again. The kind of unwillingness to take responsibility for such a critical issue has really been part of the process of eroding trust and confidence in the Chinese government. The last year, we've seen a very significant deterioration in China's standing in international opinion polls. I think it's affected the views of a lot of foreign governments and parliamentarians as well. There are clearly lots of governments that performed badly in dealing with the pandemic, but I think the issue is that China is seen to have kind of a special responsibility.
Ultimately, a critical inquiry into the origin of the coronavirus is the best hope to avoid another pandemic.
What are the right lessons to learn? How to contain these things effectively? What the ways are in future? It is a real cause for concern that we're going to get a repeat of this, and we're potentially going to have, depending on the nature of the viruses that emerge, potentially even worse cases than this. And I think this is why for the general public, this is not a political gotcha exercise to blame the Chinese government for the handling of this particular pandemic. This is absolutely critical for future pandemics too, and China is going to be, for various reasons, one of the places where these are likely to break out again. So we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to be able to figure out how to deal with it more effectively next time.